Hi everyone, this is Tom, and in this video I'm going to be going through something called Bloom's Taxonomy. And this was looked into or created many years ago and then revised in 2001 to update it. And really what Bloom's Taxonomy does is it looks at the different levels of learning and kind of how your knowledge and skills and learning progresses over time as you build on the things that you know. And specifically in this video, I want to look at how do we apply some of the principles in Bloom's taxonomy to doing really well in exams, and what study strategies can we apply so that we can hit as many levels as possible and really thrive in our exams, but not just in the exams, also after the exams when you go into kind of professional practice, you're applying this information to your day job. This is particularly relevant for, say, medical students. I'm from a medical background, and when you learn medicine, at first you just start retaining information, and then you need to be able to apply it, analyze situations, and treat patients more than just applying basic rote learning. So we're going to talk about that today. So let's first introduce Bloom's taxonomy, and this is the revised edition from 2001. So what we start with is a pyramid, and this kind of looks like the food pyramid that everybody's familiar with and doesn't really apply in the real world. But that's for a whole nother video where I talk about my diet and food and things. But for this, let's focus on this Bloom's taxonomy. So at the base of the pyramid, which is really the foundation of the pyramid, everything starts from the bottom, and without the bottom, it's an unsteady, unstable pyramid. Right at the bottom is what you can remember. So what does this mean? Well, this means just recalling facts, sort of vocabulary, and just really basic information. So can you just recall this stuff from memory? So then the next step of the pyramid, so remember would just be like, okay, you need to know human anatomy. What muscle is this? What's the name of this muscle? What's the name of this muscle? What's the name of this muscle? Just the basic facts. Where is the liver? That kind of stuff. Then you have understanding. So when you understand something, you kind of construct meaning out of these facts. So instead of just knowing like this is the muscle, you kind of understand how this muscle acts on the bone. Muscles kind of pull against the bone and they shorten and contract, and that's how it moves a joint. So you know this muscle is the bicep muscle. It attaches into the bones of the forearm, and then as it contracts, the arm will flex. And so you kind of understand this process. So this is where you kind of construct meaning and apply those, or kind of understand how those facts fit together. Then the next level is to apply the information. So this would be where you use the information that you understand and remember in context. So, for example, with this muscle analogy, you say somebody tears their bicep muscle, they have an injury and they tear the bicep muscle, and you would understand that that would cause pain, but also that would cause weakness in terms of elbow flexion, and understand the context and how that would present, say, in a patient who has a torn bicep muscle. Then the next level is to analyze. And this is where you break down sort of the individual parts of the information and understand how everything fits together and the relationships between different things. So this is kind of a tricky one to really explain, but I suppose this would be analyzing new information. If you had a new muscle, how would taking your knowledge of how the bicep works, how would this new muscle work? What action would it have on the bones it attaches to? And analyzing it a bit more complexly. And this is sort of developing the relationships between the individual parts of that information. It's a bit tricky to explain that one. The next one is to evaluate. And what does this mean? This means you kind of critically appraise the information. So if somebody comes up to you and or somebody presents a new idea or a new concept, you apply your existing knowledge and your existing understanding to critically appraise whether that concept makes sense. So I'm presenting this to you. This is my kind of theory on how Bloom's taxonomy applies to learning. If you had a really strong educational background, knowledge, you'd looked at lots of educational material before, you might critically appraise and say, I kind of agree with this thing you're talking about. I don't agree with this thing. Here's the reasons why. Here's the theories behind it. Here's the research behind it. So you're kind of applying lots and lots of knowledge in a kind of critical way to new ideas. So it's much more complex. We're getting higher up in the taxonomy here. And then the final one is to create. And this is where you might create your own, teaching schedule, your own treatments, your own ideas about things, and put them out into the world. Novel stuff. So this is things that you've not seen anybody come up with before. So for example, at this point with this video, I am creating this new kind of information, taking all my knowledge, my research that I've done on learning theory, my degree in psychology, my master's in medical education, my years of experience of sitting medical exams, trying lots of different things, doing postgraduate exams, teaching lots of students. I'm taking all that information and I'm applying it to Bloom's taxonomy, and then I'm creating this new this new video that is taking all this information, putting it all together and kind of presenting it in a novel new way. So this is kind of the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy. So this is where you're designing or developing something new. So creating is kind of the highest level of the Bloom's taxonomy. So some key points about Bloom's taxonomy before we move on. The first thing is that remembering and understanding is the foundation. So it's always tempting when you come up with something like this, you look at it and you say, okay, here are the steps, and the highest level is kind of analyzing, evaluating, creating. And to say, these are the ultimate goals, and so let's try and get to them as quick as we can. And by doing that, you can kind of bypass the remembering, understanding stages and the applying stages, and try to kind of skip those stages, skip ahead and just go straight for the kind of creation or the evaluation. And by skipping those stages, and this kind of happened in a lot of educational settings. When I was a medical student at Manchester University, we did a PBL, problem-based learning course. And so this course was very much based on small group sessions where we all got together. We looked at a case, we analyzed a case, and without any kind of background knowledge, they hadn't primed us at all. So we analyzed this case, we came up with questions and identified gaps in our knowledge, and we all went away did some studying, and came back and discussed and taught each other about the case. The issue here, in theory, it sounded good because we were kind of jumping straight to the analyzing, evaluating stage by looking at this case. And then we're kind of coming back in the analyzing, evaluating, creating stage, and kind of discussing amongst ourselves, aiming to teach each other, aiming to debate, discuss. The problem was we lacked the foundation. So everybody was always frustrated because we were like, what do we need to know? We don't know what to know. The sessions were always a little bit haphazard. It lacked a bit of structure. It was all a bit unsatisfying. And that was because we skipped those fundamental things of remembering, understanding, applying. So remembering and understanding is the foundation. And I would say the more you remember and understand, that results in making you better at applying and all of these higher stages up to creating. I think this is underestimated in the modern world where we have instant access to stored information. So because we've got our phones in our pockets, we can immediately look up some information. You can Google anything, you can ask AI anything, get instant information back. This gives us a feeling like we have this extra layer to us where we always have access to this information. The problem is what we try and do then is skip to the higher step. So evaluating or creating without having that foundation. So let's say you need to have access to 10 items of information in your brain stored there in order to put all this information together and evaluate something new. So you'll be challenged with this task of sort of analyzing or evaluating something new. You need these 10 items of information. If those 10 items of information are stored in your brain, you can immediately jump to analyzing and evaluating. If they're not stored in your brain, you have to get your phone out and look those 10 items up. And that takes a lot of time. By the time you get to the 10th item, you've probably forgotten the first one. So the more you have kind of stored there in your hard drive, in your brain, ready to access at the tips of your fingers, the better you can do all these other things like applying that information, analyzing it, and so on. This is the thing with open book exams. You would assume if you can take your notes and a book into the exam, that makes it so much easier to do the exam. In a way, it kind of makes it harder because you forget to learn all that stuff. You're in the exam and the exam asks you a question, and then you have to look up 20 things to answer that question. Whereas if they're stored in your brain, you don't have to look anything up. You can just answer the question. So the more you remember and understand, the better you can apply it. Same is true in OSCE exams. If you're a medical student, you do these OSCEs where you have to go into a station, see a simulated patient or even a real patient, look at their presentation, their history or their examination findings, put all that together, come up with a diagnosis, come up with a management plan, explain something to the patient. You can get good at doing that performance and doing the steps of that examination process or doing a history kind of thing. But the more you know, the better you're going to be at taking all the information that's given to you and applying it and analyzing it and coming up with a management plan and things. So the people who do the best in the OSCEs, not only are they good at kind of doing the analysis and applying things, but they have a massive store of stuff that they remember and understand, which they can apply to this new situation. So let's say you skip to the kind of creation stage and think to yourself, well, the top bit of Bloom's taxonomy, the ultimate goal is to be able to create new things. Let me just skip to the creation stage. So you're like 16 and you say, I'm going to write a book on philosophy without really knowing much about philosophy. The problem here, this is kind of fun. It's fun to create things without having a kind of foundation of knowledge and being able to apply things to the world. But it's not really insightful or meaningful, because you're kind of you're skipping a lot of the foundation steps, trying to jump to a higher level, but actually you're not really coming up with anything useful because you don't have that foundation. So this is a bit like, let's say you're watching your sports team and you're criticizing the coach for a decision that coach has made. Just having never coached a team, not really knowing much about that sport other than the basic rules. It's the same is true if, you watch the Olympics and you critique an athlete, or you critique some kind of advanced person for their decisions. But you're doing that based on very limited knowledge, experience, understanding. And so it's fun, which is great. By all means do it. But if you were in that situation, your foundation would mean that you're not the smartest you think you are. This reminds me of the Dunning-Kruger effect. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is like your confidence. This is Dunning-Kruger. And your knowledge. So when you have, I might have got those the wrong way around, but when you have very little knowledge, so you have little knowledge, little experience, little understanding of the topic, your confidence is actually very high. You're kind of unaware of your own ignorance. So you are like, you think you know everything, but you don't. And then what happens is, as you start to build up your knowledge, your confidence goes down. So you realize things are a lot more complicated than you first thought. You don't know as much as you first thought. Your conclusions were based on very limited knowledge and experience and understanding. And so you kind of have this real dip in confidence where you think, oh my gosh, I don't know anything. I'm never going to know anything. You kind of end up in this valley of despair. And then you start building actual knowledge and actual understanding, and the confidence starts to rise. And then you get to a level of mastery up here where your confidence and your knowledge is high. So let's move on. How does Bloom's taxonomy apply? So let's look at study techniques and how they apply to Bloom's taxonomy. So the first one I want to start with is making notes. So when you make notes, what I'm talking about is you take a textbook, you take a lecture, you take a podcast, you take a video, you take some kind of source of information, and you have a notepad next to you, and you essentially just transfer information from one place to your notepad. And you can make it beautiful and colorful, and you can copy illustrations and things. You can organize that into a lovely, pretty sort of structure. But ultimately, you're not doing any of these taxonomies. So are you remembering it? No, you're just putting it in another place. Are you understanding it? Not really. You're just taking information and transferring it to another place. Are you applying it? No, you're just transferring it, and you're not doing any of the higher ones. So making notes doesn't really hit any of Bloom's taxonomy. It's not helping you remember. It's not helping you understand. It's not helping you do anything. You're just transferring information. Making notes is a waste of time. I got a whole video on this. Making notes, there is a role for notes in just kind of giving yourself prompts to future studying and organizing the information that you need to retain, but it doesn't help you learn. Next is doing Anki. And someone commented on my recent video saying, what's the point in all this? Because we've got Anki now and that solves all these problems. The same is true of just doing short answer practice questions. These help with remembering. Remember. So they help you remember stuff, but they don't do anything more for you. The problem with Anki is you're just getting very specific facts that you're drilling into your memory, which is really helpful. There's definitely a role for doing short answer questions and Anki, which we'll talk about as the video goes on. But it doesn't help with understanding. It doesn't help with having the bigger picture. It doesn't help with applying that information. And then when you're in your exams, which we'll talk about in a minute, when you're in your exams, you have to apply that information. And then that's when you get stuck. So your exam might be exactly like Anki. It might be testing you on exactly the same facts that you have in your Anki deck. Great, that'll work. But if your exam involves applying the information in a multiple choice question format, in a essay format, in an OSCE format, in any sort of like verbal examination format, Anki is limited. It just gives you the remember stage. Then you've got passive reading or videos or podcasts or lectures. So this is just absorbing, listening and reading information from a book or a video or so on. This gives you understanding. So it helps you understand the information. It helps you take in and process that information, but it doesn't help you remember it. That's important. You won't retain the information. You're just absorbing it. You retain information by recalling it. When you recall it, that's what writes information to your memory. Passively reading or listening helps you understand, but doesn't help you retain it and remember it. So next I got my technique, which is read and recall. And I won't go through that here, but essentially you're combining free recall, recalling things from memory, with reading. And I've got a full video on that. That helps you remember and understand. So it does both of those. And you can do it in such a way where you try and analyze and assess the information as well. So there are other levels to read and recall, but for the most part, it's remembering and understanding. Then you've got practice MCQs. So people use for medicine question banks very often. Question banks are helpful, but this depends on the quality of the question bank. If you've got a very basic question bank that does basic multiple choice questions, these are very similar to Anki or short answer questions. They help you remember specific, I'm terrible at spelling this remember, aren't I? Let's try again. They help you remember very specific facts. So you just learn to spot a fact, spot a keyword, spot something, and know what answer to select. That's a low-level quality MCQ bank. If you get a higher level one where there's more depth to the questions, they can help you apply and analyze. In your exams, the purpose of multiple choice questions is to test your knowledge a bit beyond just basic memory. They will ask you to apply your knowledge, which means you need to have a foundation of remembering, understanding, and practice applying. So choose a quality MCQ bank, and the Zero to Finals member site is designed for that purpose. The next one is doing essays. So this is if you're writing essays as a way of practicing studying. This can vary from none. If your essay is almost just copying it out, like making notes, you don't get any benefit from that. Or it could be all. So you could be pushing yourself to the level of creating something new based on all these foundations of knowledge. So essays can range in the full spectrum. The same is true of teaching others. So if you put together a teaching program, so you get together a small group and you've put together some slides or a teaching session and you're going to teach them stuff, this can again range from none. So if you just have like a set of notes and you're just copying out that set of notes for other people to watch you copy out and copy into their thing, that doesn't apply, that doesn't help you remember, doesn't help you understand. That's really a waste of time. Or it could be a very interactive, dynamic teaching session where you've actually created some new ideas and ways of teaching. And so all of them could apply. So essays and teaching others, it really depends on the quality. Same with practice MCQs. So next, let's look at assessments or exams. So this is how assessments or exams will test your level of learning in Bloom's taxonomy. So if you've got a multiple choice question exam or a short answer question exam, this will test your ability to remember. So how much do you remember? How much can you do you understand? And can you apply that information? If it's a short answer question exam, it might just be testing what you can remember. Let me just fix this. If it's kind of asking you for short answers, but you have to explain a concept or apply some information to a new scenario, that'll test your application. But these exams, multiple choice questions, short answer questions, don't tend to go beyond these first three levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Then you've got OSCEs. So these are in-person practical exams where you go in, you see a simulated patient, you take a history or you examine them or you have a discussion with them. And so you're actually doing doing a real world scenario where you're applying and analyzing the information that you're given. So these go from everywhere from remembering. So you do need to remember information. If you go in and you see a patient and they have these signs, they're jaundice, they've got ascites, they've got caput medusa, they've got telangiectasia, they've got all these signs. You have to remember that those signs apply to liver cirrhosis and liver failure. So you have to remember some key information. You have to understand that those signs all link and why they link to liver cirrhosis. You have to apply that information. You've got this patient with these signs. How would that fit with a medical condition? And then you have to kind of analyze and put all that together and come up with a management plan and how that a patient should be treated. So you have to do everything from remembering to analyzing. You have to do that in real time. So it's kind of a tricky scenario. Then you've got essays. So essay kind of exams. And this is where you go in and you sit down and you have to do an essay. And these could potentially involve doing all, or could potentially just involve just some basic remembering and understanding. But essay exams can be challenging because you may even be challenged to create a new procedure for doing this thing based on all your current understanding. And the same is true of like projects. Potentially could be all. So you might have a project that you need to do, which is going to take you 10 weeks. You have to gather loads of information. You have to apply it, analyze it, evaluate it, and create something new. And then you could have like procedural exams. So let's say maths exams or coding exams or something like that. These will kind of take you to the potentially could be all for these as well. So next, let's talk about preparation for exams. So what are you trying to achieve with your preparation for the exams? Well, first you want to build a foundation. There's always this temptation to jump to the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, but I would argue that the first objective is really to build a foundation. So this is a foundation of remembering and understanding. So basically, the way you can look at this is you're storing information. So you're storing information in your brain that you can later access and retrieve so that you can apply it, analyze situations, evaluate, create new things, and so on. But in order to do that, you just need to store tons and tons of information. This is particularly true in medical school, and I had this feeling in my final year of medical school where I'd kind of learned all the skills. I kind of knew how to apply stuff, I knew how to evaluate, and I knew how to create stuff. But I just needed loads, I just needed to download loads and loads and loads of data. So let's say I could see a patient with a cardiology condition, analyze that condition, evaluate, create a management plan, create new sort of ideas around something in cardiology. So I kind of had those skills, but there was just a ton of different conditions that I just didn't know about. I just had to download lots and lots of knowledge and understanding about different things so that then I could do the higher levels across lots of different, say, specialties. The next one is to practice. And you need to just practice for the exams. And this is where you kind of apply this knowledge and you analyze new situations. So you need these two things. You need to build a massive foundation of knowledge, and you need to practice ready for whatever exam scenario you're going to be in. So let's say you've got an MCQ exam. You need loads and loads of knowledge, and you need to be able to do MCQs, apply that knowledge to new patients, new situations, new scenarios. Same is true in an OSCE. You need this massive foundation of knowledge, and you need to practice doing OSCE scenarios so that you're ready to go in and apply that knowledge to a new situation, new scenario. Same would be true if you've got a maths exam or some procedural thing, some kind of coding, software design, anything like that where it's procedural. You need a big foundation of knowledge. So you've got loads of information there at your fingertips, and you need to practice applying that and doing that scenario in your exam. So the next thing is to introduce my concept of the testing sandwich. And this is my strategy that I recommend for how you apply all of this to study sessions. So the testing sandwich is a single study session. What does this mean? Well, let's say you're thinking, okay, this is all great, this is all theoretical, but I want a practical, how do I just practically do this? What you do is you've got some information you need to learn, and you've got, some written information, some questions and so on. And you go to the library, you've got that stuff that you want to download into your brain. So you sit down in the library and you block off 1 to 4 hours to do a single study session. And this is what that study session will look like. You start with short answer questions. So this is the first step of the testing sandwich. And what you're doing here is you're training your remembering. You're testing how much you already know, and you're also training those facts into your memory. Then, once you finish the short answer questions on this topic, then you go on to read and recall. And with read and recall, what you're doing is training your memory. You're actually drilling those facts into your memory when you recall them, and you're improving your understanding. So you're targeting the bottom two of this Bloom's taxonomy. Then you move on to some kind of exam practice on the same topic. So this could be, if you're a medical student, this could be doing quality MCQ exams, or it could be practicing essays, or it could be practicing problems. So if you're doing a maths exam, this would be doing, problem scenarios and solving problems. And here, this is where you're doing the higher levels. You're taking that information that you've remembered and understood, and now you're doing the higher level stuff of applying that information. You need all three of these, because if you just do the higher level stuff, you don't have that foundation knowledge. If you just do read and recall, okay, you could do that without the short answer questions. But sometimes you just need those short answer questions just to really drill the key facts into your memory. And there are other benefits to doing short answer question first, like your baseline knowledge, and it primes your brain to then absorb more information. So that's the testing sandwich. And the final thing, just some final additional principles to applying this stuff, is when you're organizing your revision schedule, you want to add in spaced repetitions. So if you're going to study one topic, like say cardiology today, you don't just want to rely on that one study session, that one testing sandwich. You want to repeat that testing sandwich for cardiology again in, say, 10 days' time, and then again in, say, 3 weeks' time. So you're spacing out repetitions of study sessions, because if you just rely on one study session, very quickly you'll forget everything. Within a few days, you'll be down to like 30% of what you studied. So you need spaced repetitions, and you need to track your learning. So when I say track your learning, what do you track? Well, you track your study sessions. Remember, you're going to do spaced repetitions, so you need to know if you did it today. Track that you studied it today. And then in 2 weeks' time, when you're looking at what to study, you say, okay, I studied this topic 2 weeks ago, I need to repeat it again. So you're tracking the date, and you're tracking your confidence. And the reason for tracking confidence is that you can then, when you're tracking lots of different topics that you need to cover, you can look back and say, which topics was I least confident at? And those are the topics you need to do more repetitions of. You're tracking your short answer question scores. So you're looking at what did you score on those short answer questions before you study the topic. So that again shows you where your weaknesses are and what you need to spend more time on. And your practice exam scores. So if you're doing multiple choice questions at the end of the testing sandwich, this would be your score for those. And spacing and tracking your learning helps you organize your time and address your weaknesses. And then the final thing is, say 1 to 2 weeks before your exam, I would just do sort of memory, so rapid testing. So you're just doing things that help you remember stuff. So at this point, 1 to 2 weeks before your exam, you should understand everything. And so what you're focusing on is just remembering stuff. So just doing, for example, where is it? Just doing Anki or short answer questions or flashcards 1 to 2 weeks before your exams, and doing practice stuff for the exam. So practice MCQs or essays. So you're doing rapid testing for your remembering and practice so that you're good at what you're going to be doing in the exam. I hope that video was helpful. That pretty much covers everything I want to talk about with Bloom's taxonomy. If you have any thoughts, do leave them in the comments below. I love hearing your thoughts. I love seeing the comments. It helps me to see where there's things that I need to address in future videos. If you want a really nice version of these notes so you can refer back to them, you can get them on the Zero to Finals Patreon. There's a link in the description below. That way you don't have to rewatch this whole sort of 40-minute video. You can just go back and refer straight to those notes and see how you're going to apply this. And I hope to see you in the next video, which will be tomorrow.